Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us here for another episode, wherever in the world you're listening from and whatever platform you're listening to us on. As always, thank you so much for the support, and thank you, as always, for sharing the podcast to those who you know would be interested in it. Today's episode is one that applies to all of us, and it's going to be about communicating effectively with players. We all know that communicating with young adults and teenagers brings its own unique challenges to it. And as coaches, we have a responsibility to make sure that we are getting the best information out to our players in the clearest, most concise way possible so that there's no confusion about what we're telling them. So that's what we're going to get into today. We're going to get into some tips and tricks to maximize communication and make sure that we're communicating the most effective way possible to our players. And to help bring some insight into this topic, I'm very happy to be joined by boys basketball coach, as well as an English teacher like myself, Coach Dan Bachicha. Coach, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing well, Coach. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really looking forward to getting into this. Communication is such an important topic, especially in the coaching world. So let's go ahead and get started, Coach, with your basketball journey. Where is the game taking you? Where's coaching taking you? And how did you end up where you currently are right now?
Yeah, so my dad, he was the head basketball coach from the time I was born to the time I was 7 at Manzano High School in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I would just go with him to practice. I would just tag along practice with him and go to his games. And I just fell in love with the game from a very early age. And then I went to high school at Valley High School, and my head coach, Joe Coleman, he knew that I loved basketball. He knew that my dad was a former coach, and he kind of mentored me to be a coach. Even when I was in high school, I played freshman ball for him, and I'm only 5'3.5", not very athletic. So obviously, it was going to be a struggle to make the varsity team. So I was his varsity manager for 3 years, and being a manager, it almost felt like it was almost like I was a college manager in the sense that, you had a lot of added responsibilities, almost like a, coach in waiting kind of. And he even signed my yearbook my senior year, when you want a job, let me know. So I took a year off, focused on college my first year, and I went back the next year in 06-07 school year. I graduated in 05, and I was a C team assistant, and then I went to Sandia High School for 3 years, where I coached under Alvin Broussard and Adrian Ortega. And then I took a couple years off. I got married, had a family, and then I went to La Cueva for 3 years, and I coached under New Mexico Hall of Fame coach Frank Castillo. And then I was under Justin Woody at Highland for 2 years. And then I finally got my first opportunity to be a head varsity coach at Laguna Acoma Junior Senior High School. It serves 7th grade through senior year. And I'm the head boys varsity coach there now. In awesome. This is going to be my 3rd year.
This will be a 3rd year. Awesome, Coach. Great. One of the things I wanted to get into before we get into this topic is, like myself, you are a classroom teacher. And so I wanted to talk about being a teacher in the classroom and how that has helped you in your coaching journey. So in what ways does the classroom and the work that you do there translate to what you're doing in the gym in terms of your teaching as well as your communication style?
Right. I think it's the other way around for me because I was coaching 9 years before I started teaching. This is going to be my 2nd year as a teacher. And I think that, coaching has really helped me teach. I think there's so many different things that translates from the gym to the classroom, like as far as communication. I would say building relationships is is the foundation. I mean, you got to lay the foundation. I think building relationships with those kids, making sure that they feel important and special, like they're an individual, not just a number. So many teachers are like, well, I just see this, this paper, I'm going to grade it and turn it back. You know, they don't know what the what's going on at home with the kids. Sometimes they don't even know the kid's name till halfway through the year. So I think building relationships with the kids is first and foremost, and then setting the expectations and the goals for the classroom as well as your program, setting team expectations and individual expectations. Make sure they're clear. Offer the floor to the kids too if they have any questions about it. You know, the expectations or the rules. If they have any questions on the material after you're done lecturing or teaching or whatever it might be, opening up the floor for them, because every kid learns different. So if you open up the floor for questions, I think that's really important. It just helps out every kid learn, because each kid's going to have a different question and a different point of view on everything.
Yeah, and one of the things I like about that too is if you can open up the floor to questions, you are allowing an environment where like questions are okay, and like students or players in that case feel like they don't have this pressure to know everything, and that it's okay that they ask questions to get clarifications on things. I think that takes a lot of anxiety, I think, away from your players and your students if you teach, where they know that, okay, it's all right if I ask questions because it's being encouraged.
Absolutely, especially, you know, as an English teacher, like with figurative language, you know, stuff like that. I mean, some of it could be so black and white, but some of it could be so broad too. And a lot of the kids will ask questions. Well, you know, this kind of sounds like it's personification, but it's not literally by the textbook definition of it. What do you think? You know, I really like that. As far as basketball is concerned, you know, I teach a pack line man to man, you know, and when they're under the basket and help side, I call it hoop, so they could understand it easily. That's another thing about communication, having terms that are easy for them to understand. If I say help side is hoop, that means that my head's got to be under the rim, my butt's got to be to the baseline. You know, it's really easy for them to understand. So key terms and definitions that are easy for the kids to understand, I think is really important too.
Yeah, I like that about the simple terms. If you have like those one word cues and everybody kind of knows what that stands for, man, that takes away a lot of time that you might have to spend otherwise overly explaining things, for sure. Awesome. So we'll continue to definitely get into that for sure. As coaches, especially some who've been around the game for a long time, or those who've played the game for a long time and have a lot of basketball knowledge kind of stored within them, we have a lot of knowledge, but we also need to be able to speak clearly to our players, because they don't necessarily need to hear all of the knowledge that we have. So how do you talk to your players in a way that's concise? And I know we just kind of get into that. How do you talk to your players in a way that's kind of concise, but also making sure that you're getting the point across as well?
Again, the terms like hoop or one pass away for me, because I teach a pack line, is gap. You know, ball. You know, if you're guarding a guy at the top of the key and you're on ball gets swung to the wing, you got to jump to the gap. Yeah, and all five guys are communicating. I think it's really important I always say all five guys have something to say on the floor, because when I was an assistant coach and when I first got my first head job, the only guy usually talking, unfortunately, is the guy that's on the ball saying ball, 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 you know. But I should hear all five guys talking. I'm in gap, I'm in help. You know, I think that's really important. The players have to communicate too. They have that responsibility. I think that's really important for me as a coach, to give the kids that expectation. I also think breaking it down into steps, you know, especially if you're, you know, building a brand new program in your first year or 2 years. I mean, you got to break it down into steps. So when I'm teaching my read and react offense, because I run a 5 out and a 4 out. When I'm teaching my read and react offense, I'll teach it 2-on-1. I'll teach it 2-on-1, and I'll be like, okay, if your defender jumps to the ball, you're rear cutting. If he does not jump to the ball and he hugs you, you're front cutting. And then there's another rule we call the 3-point line the read line, because it's a read and react. So if even his toenail is touching the 3-point line, it's an automatic backdoor. So teaching that in a 2-on-1 situation is a lot easier for them to, grasp it. And then you go to a 2-on-2 and a 3-on-3, and eventually you get to a 5-on-5. I just think breaking it down in the steps, they got to learn to roll over, then to learn to crawl, then to learn to walk. I mean, a baby doesn't come out of the womb running laps, so I think really breaking it down into steps, especially, your first couple of years running the program is really important, especially for me now. We were only one of 5 or 6 teams in the entire state of New Mexico that didn't have a season due to COVID-19.
For sure.
So, and then we played a lot this summer, but we actually finally got in the gym this summer and had summer ball, and I put us against tough competition. We're a 2A school, and I put them in against a lot of 3 and 4A teams on purpose, to get us better for the season. And you could tell that they had forgotten a lot and that they were out of shape because we didn't play the year before, and they were in quarantine and all that stuff. So I almost feel like going into this year, it almost feels like it's my first year all over again, just because, we're going to have to go over the basics again, which is fine. It's good to just break it down, make sure they got everything down correctly.
Well, I think that's just a really interesting thought, just because of the situation that we've kind of been in over the past year, is you kind of think of that loss of time, or that loss of perhaps some knowledge or of terminology that's kind of slipped away because of everything that's happened over the last 18 months or so. So I guess unique to your situation now, as you're kind of getting back in the swing of things, as you just sort of mentioned, are there certain things about what you run, either offensively or defensively, that you think you're going to definitely have to do some refreshers on, or some things you might have to like re-emphasize and make sure that your team is on the same page on?
Yeah, I think defensively, one of the main things is our pack line defense, because especially out on the reservation, those kids just like to get up in your face and pressure, and that's all great, especially ball pressure, because I teach ball pressure on the ball. But they this summer especially was a problem teaching the gap, because they got back in the old habit of denying the passing lane, and then we would just get beat backdoor to death. And I got the pack line from my mentor at Highland, Justin Woody, and his thing was always, I would rather give up a contested 3 than give up a wide open layup, because I'm denying the passing lane, and they just beat us to death backdoor all game long. And I kind of tend to agree with that, because if you're playing the pack line man to man properly, and you're closing out properly, you're pretty much not going to give up anything in the paint. More often than not, sure, the defense breaks down, and things happen, but for the most part, you're going to force a lot of contested outside shots. So getting the kids in that back in that pack line gap mentality, kind of sitting back just inside the 3-point line when the ball is one pass away, is something that we're going to have to work on. I think as far as the read and react, sometimes the kids forget to cut.
I've noticed that too.
So many times they'll pass and just look. It's like, you got to go, pass and cut, pass, even screen away. You got to move without the basketball. I tell them, who's the best shooter in the NBA? Steph Curry, coach. I said, you think he's just catch and shoot? And they have to think about it. for a minute.
Mhm.
And I said, he's probably the best player in the NBA, probably one of the best of all time at moving without the basketball. The
Yeah.
way he moves without the ball, getting himself open, utilizing back screens and rip screens, double screen, whatever it might be. I mean, that guy is just unbelievable moving without the basketball, and that makes him a better shooter. If he was just a catch and shoot kind of guy, I mean, he wouldn't be where he's at right now. Moving without the basketball is super important. And I'm like, even if you make a mistake, even if you do the wrong thing, at least you're moving. And that's kind of my big thing. Don't just pass and just stand.
Yeah.
That's a big pet peeve of mine.
Yeah, I've been there too. One of the things that I think though has also been kind of interesting though, about the situation we've been in the past 18 months, and I'm sure you're finding this too, is if you've had that loss of time or you haven't been around your players as much because of whatever decisions were made, you really have to refocus and kind of think as a coach what is most important to you, and you have to kind of think about the things that matter the most to you and what really you want to make sure you're communicating and emphasizing. And at least I've found that I really had to kind of think about my own coaching practices and what was most important to me. And I'm curious if you kind of had the same situation as well with all the kind of downtime you had.
Yeah, I had a lot of downtime. We won 17 games my first year. We went 17-11. We played in the toughest district. Now we're 2A, but my first year was our last year in 3A, and our district had the state championship game in it. Bosque Prep and Sandia Prep, they were a state title game, and we finished tied for third in that district. And so some of the things that I probably could have improved on was discipline. I probably let some kids, just because it was my first year and I wanted to win. I think I sacrificed, almost my integrity a little bit, for some W's. I thought there was some times where I probably should have benched some kids when I didn't. And reflecting back on that, over the last, and we didn't even play last year. So really over the last 2 years, that's something I'm going to bring to the table, is holding the kids accountable for their actions a little bit more. And I think that's really going to, we can see the fruits of that on the floor this coming year.
Yeah, for sure.
I also think, really hammering home on the fundamentals a little bit more. I got this from Coach Woody. He has something called Fundamental 15, and without fail, the first 15 minutes of every off-season workout, in-season practice, it didn't matter, is fundamentally based. And I did that most of the year, and then once we got in the district, was so focused on the game plan, scouting, that kind of thing, kind of got away from that. And even the kids, would tell us tell me after a season, Coach, we probably should have kept doing Fundamental 15. Got away from that, and I kind of tend to agree as well. So I started the year off, and a lot of coaches, will start the year off with that kind of stuff and let it drift away. But what I got from Justin at Highland, is just to really preach the fundamentals, and I kind of got away from that towards the end of the year, and really just keep that focus for the long run. I think will be beneficial to us as well.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And I think that what you mentioned is a really common thing, and for any like new coaches or younger coaches who are kind of reflecting on their practices, realizing that maybe some parts of maybe your coaching style kind of get a little bit thrown away maybe when you first start, because you might be sacrificing some things for wins, or thinking about the end result rather than maybe other things that are important or more important. But being able to kind of reflect on that and get back on track with that, and I've been there too, I think is super important. So I'm glad you're able to bring that up. In terms of teaching the game, we've kind of talked a little bit about the terminology that you used and kind of the trying to keep things simple, 1 word, 2 words that all your players understand. I'm curious in terms of your communication style, the way that you talk to players. In an ideal situation, if you had your players, let's say every year, and there was no stopping of a season for anything, how much of what you communicate to your players would you then expect maybe your older players to then in turn be communicating and teaching to your younger players coming in?
I mean, everything.
Yeah.
I have always, and I've heard, I'm sure you've heard this too. Good teams are led by the coach. Great teams, championship teams are player led. If you look at when I was a kid growing up, the Bulls. Phil Jackson was the coach of that team, but Michael Jordan was the be all end all. Michael Jordan was holding the players accountable. Michael Jordan was, telling people telling Scottie Pippen where to be in the triangle. Telling Steve Kerr, hey, they're going to double me. Be ready for this shot. I mean, just having the kids lead. I mean, it is super important. And if you don't have it, if your captain is not doing the things that they need to be doing, and they're not, being vocal in practice or in the locker room or at the game or even in school, if they see a player ditching class, go get them, turn them around and say, hey, get the class. Otherwise you can't play tonight. Do the right thing.
Yeah.
Or they see him drinking a soda, at lunch. No, here, have a Gatorade or have some water. We play in 3 hours. I think that's really important to have your junior, senior leadership, seniors especially, but juniors, especially for me, most of my leaders are juniors this year. Just having them, lead by example, and not only lead by example, but lead verbally as well. I just told a kid, because we got a Google Classroom, and I I posted something, and a junior posted something back that was kind of sarcastic, and I stopped him in the hallway the other day and I said, hey, you doing this, there's a lot of, and because eighth graders can play at our level too, even though they'll all play C team more than likely. But I was like, hey, you know what? I got a lot of eighth graders this year that see that,
Mm-hmm.
and you're our varsity captain. And if they see that you're modeling this, then they're probably gonna fall in line. Like you got to be more mature and make sure, whether it's in Google Classroom or on the basketball floor, whatever it might be, that that you're leading by example, and that you're doing and saying the right things. And he's a great kid. I just think it was just, it was the end of the school day when he posted it, probably kind of tired and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
it's like, you know, there's eyes on you, especially in a small community. It's a reservation school. The entire school from eighth grade to from seventh grade to senior year is like 250 students in the entire
Oh
school.
wow, yeah.
But yeah. So it's like, you know what? I mean, all eyes are on you, dude. And they love their basketball. They pack that gym. The entire reservation goes to the games and sells the games, and they're looking at you.
Well, one of the things I wanted to just make sure I kind of circle back to, because you brought it up, is because of the digital environment that we're in, especially the one that we definitely were in over the past 18 months or so. Like, your communication style as a coach also comes down to the way that you electronically communicate with players. And I know that I myself have had a situation or two where players interpreted something I said differently just because they read it over text versus me saying it. And I feel like that's something also to just be aware of, is your communication style, even digitally. You just need to think about the way a kid might interpret it or read that message, even if you had no intention of it coming across a certain way.
Exactly, and it actually turned out being the exact same thing, but I misinterpreted how he meant it.
Yeah.
I took it I took it as he's being sarcastic, and he goes, "Coach, no, I actually meant it as like a yes sir, like I agree with you."
Mm-hmm.
uh when I took it as, him just like repeating it in like a sarcastic kind of way, when I guess he wasn't. And I believed him. I was like, yeah, it's kind of hard to, as you said, when you're reading something, you misinterpret it. And that's why, that's why I would always call the kids during the pandemic and see how they're doing, hear their voice, see how it's affecting them. And then we would do Zoom workouts too, because we couldn't work out in person. So we would do some, you know, strength and conditioning and cardio over Zoom. They would just, get water jugs and fill it with sand or whatever and do curls, or, they would put weights in their backpack and they would bench their backpack, or they would
Yeah.
run in place. It was kind of weird, but I was just like, you know what, we got to do something. I just can't, I gotta bond with you kids. We got to get to work. We got to, even though I know a lot of you guys probably think Zoom workouts are dumb, but we had to get to work and do something during that time. And I thought the kids bought in really well
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah. And I mean, that's just a really helpful tool as well, just keeping like the team together and keeping basketball kind of on the forefront of their mind, and just keeping the unity of your team together. I know that that was a big challenge for some programs, is basically not having their team drift apart during that
Right.
time, and then basically have to try and reassemble everything once things came back together. So yeah, doing even those like Zoom workouts, I mean, I think that super helpful, if anything, just to keep basketball still on their mind and something that they're thinking about, for that for sure. um
Right.
Wanted to touch on communication in game. So the way that you're speaking in game, I had a couple questions I wanted to ask about that. So I'll kind of start with this first one, just kind of in a general sense. When your players are playing in a game and you're coaching on the sideline, what is your communication style? How do you generally, I know every game's different, but how do you generally like to communicate when you're on the sidelines and during a game?
On the sideline, it's always, uh, I think, and you've heard this, the point guard's the coach on the floor.
Yes.
I rely on my point guard a lot. I might give my point guard a hand signal, or I'll call a play out to the point guard, and it's up to the point guard to, especially in a packed gym, like, I think we got the best fans in the entire state. Especially in a loud gym like ours. Hand signals are really important. And then, the point guard who goes from the back court to the front court could communicate a lot easier with the other with the other four on the floor than I could shouting it out.
Yeah.
And another thing too is, you know, especially at the high school level, and it's so competitive. I mean, if I call something out, you know, 9 times out of 10, the opposing coach is going to hear what I say, know what we're going to run, that kind of thing. So I think hand gestures is really important to the point guard. Maybe a quick one or two word, verbalization to the point guard, and just trusting the point guard to get everybody in the right spots from there. I really rely a lot on my point guard to, get the kids to where they need to be.
Well, it's something that I think is really interesting that you bring up in terms of the way that you communicate on the court, is the amount of preparation that other coaches do. And especially if they like see you in person or scout you in person, the fact that, things that you might call out, or directions that you might give, that other coach, like you said, they'll probably know exactly what it is you're talking about, and they'll just reply with a counter of their own. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden you're in some sort of like weird verbal jousting on the sidelines of realizing, oh, they know what I'm going to do, so I got to do this, and see if they understand what that means. And it could become
Right.
this whole sort of thing.
And even switching up your hand signals, because what I've noticed, and I do this too, and when I was an assistant coach, I got this when we would break down film and stuff. They'd be like, "See this hand signal over there? This means that this play is coming."
Mm.
So like even the hand signals like they get into. So one of the things, especially this year, that I'm going to do different is have the hand signal pre-district hand signals, and then come up with a second, hand signal in district for that exact same play.
Yeah.
I
Huh.
I
Right.
might twirl my finger in the air for our motion offense or whatever pre-district, and then I got to, something else. The coach is watching that, and well, this when he's breaking it down on it with his scout team in practice, they're like, okay, this is motion or whatever for Laguna Acoma. You know what's coming if you see this, and then this comes completely different. Like if you have a different signal in district, and they're like, what the heck? Like I was expecting that. You just got to be another step ahead.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And I think that just speaks to the level of preparation, even kind of going one step further. I think that like goes into how much preparation is required, and how much, as a coach, you have to be aware of not only what your team's doing, but what potentially the other team is doing. And I feel like as this goes back into communication, because of all of the different things and how competitive everything is, the more you can kind of simplify your terminology and simplify your directions, because there's probably so many things you're going to have to potentially communicate. I think it just saves you so much time by just having simple directions or simple things that you can pivot to if you need to do a counter or anything like that, but still speak in kind of that concise manner where you're not having to basically say all of these different directions and potentially have something lost in translation.
right. And the good thing about hand signals too is, and this is a teacher, some kids are are more visual learners.
Yes.
Like if I were to say, we call our pack line, 11, for example. Like if I just say pack line, or if I just say 11 or whatever, kid might not get it. But if I just throw up, you know, 2 1s, they're like, okay, I got that now. Like I know what we're doing. I know how to execute it. So some kid, you got to differentiate.
Yeah.
I think that's really important on the basketball floor too. Just going back to our first point, it's just so crazy how coaching a sport, not just basketball, coaching any sport, and then into the classroom, it's like they just mirror each other.
Yeah. 100%. They're definitely complementary for sure. Going into more of a specific situation, how do you like to approach communication in terms of timeouts? What, 30-second minute timeout? What's your communication style if there's a timeout on the floor?
Yeah, I got to have eye contact. I got to have eye contact with everybody. And especially with the guys that are in the game. I have to have their eye contact, and they have to also have, if I'm writing something on the board, they got to have eye contact with the board,
Mm.
like the board was a person, because they have to know what's going on. And I make sure, and this is good for visual learners as well, is writing their initials on the board where they need to be, making sure they're looking, making sure they're paying attention, and calling their name out. Johnny, you're setting this rip screen for Thomas. Thomas, make sure you set your man up and make sure you cut hard. Jaden, make sure you look for that pat. Make sure you look for Thomas coming off that rip screen, and make a good solid pass to him. Make, because if you say their name, they'll
Yes.
perk up. They'll perk up. It's the same way in the classroom. If you're teaching, if you're teaching something and they're not really paying attention to you, and they're goofing off and they're talking to their girlfriend at the next seat over, and you say Kim, whoa, Kim's gonna look up, right? So making sure you're constantly saying the name of the kid that you're addressing, because they're just going to focus in more just subconsciously. They might not even know that they're doing it. But, if you say my name, hey, I'm going to look up and I'm going to kind of lock in a little bit more. So, saying their names often in a timeout, making sure there's eye contact is really important. And get also, my assistant coaches are really working hard in a timeout too, because I need them to make sure that the kids that aren't in the game aren't looking at the stands, aren't checking out the girls in the stands or the cheerleaders or whatever, and their focus is on our huddle.
Yeah,
I think it's really important for the assistant coaches, to have a role in the timeout as well, because I need all 12 or 13 kids engaged in that timeout.
Yeah, I really like when I see like the coaches who have their timeouts. You can almost see like it's like its own little closed off like circle, and everything that's being communicated is staying within that circle, and everybody is fully engaged in that circle. It's like a bubble, and like nobody can penetrate it, or nobody can break it, or nobody's looking anywhere else. And I think like what you mentioned about the eye contact piece and just having everybody's attention, because those timeouts go by really quickly. And I really like what you said about mentioning the names first, especially because, as you know, of how quickly those timeouts go, you got to make sure that there's no loss of understanding. You get their name, you say their name, say the direction, and almost kind of get out of there, sort of thing.
You're right. And sometimes they have to remind me of stuff too, because
sure.
You're making subs all game long, and then you call a timeout, and one of the first things I'll say, especially if it's a 30-second timeout and I don't have a lot of time, I'll be like, who's in the game? Like I need, and I'll have 5 guys, and I'll be like, okay, Johnny, you're here. Tim, you're here. Jaden, you're here. You know what I mean? And it helps me out, because, the band's playing or whatever, it's a 1-point game. You're trying to focus on what play you're going to call, and you're not necessarily thinking, okay, who's in the game? And that's where they kind of help you out. It's quick. Who's in the game? Boom. 5 hands go up. Okay. It's easy to draw up the play, call their names. So they help out in that too. And they know to expect that, especially in a 30-second timeout, especially late in the game, late in the quarter, or something like that, where I might have my wheels turning extra hard.
Yeah.
It's quick. It takes literally 1 second. Their hands go up quick, and then we could get to the X's and O's and what we're gonna do.
Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting ways with that, specifically about making sure that all the 5 players are paying full attention. I've seen like different differentiations where like the 5 players are the ones in front, and then everyone else kind of huddles around. It's really interesting how much nuance there is with that. But yeah, absolutely. And I think going on with that too, your players, as you mentioned, can give you some information and can give you some insight, because they're seeing the game in a very different way than you are. And so by having that environment where you not only are you inviting questions, but also is kind of like we talked about, where like your players feel comfortable being able to communicate back to you. I feel like sometimes I get the best information from what my players are seeing, because they see it obviously on the court where I'm on the sideline.
And another thing, going back to the players, and and they got the feel of the game. We're just on the sideline. Oftentimes in a timeout, I'll be like, okay, because I like to press on made baskets a lot.
For sure.
Get people, and I'll be like, hey, do you want to stick with our diamond, or do you want to go to our 33X, which is a 1-2-2? And then they're pretty good. They're like, diamond's working. Or they could be like, let's switch it up. Or maybe we shouldn't press at all. Maybe we should go to our half diamond 1-3-1 half court trap. Maybe we should go back to our 11, our pack line man to man. And sometimes I'll defer to them, because ultimately they're playing. They got the feel of the game. They know what's going on. And sometimes I'll defer to them.
Yeah.
Because we got to humble ourselves as coaches too, because I think, sometimes, and I'm guilty of this, is, well, I'm the coach and this is what we're going to do. And this is how we're going to run it. And it better be done this way or whatever. That we're not playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, especially if you got a veteran team, maybe if you have a team of freshmen and sophomores at your varsity level that are playing a lot, maybe not so much, maybe baby it a little bit more. But if you have an experienced, battle-tested veteran varsity basketball team, I mean, deferring to them every once in a great while, will benefit you, because sometimes they'll make good calls and they'll make good decisions. And I'm like, well, I'm glad they brought that to my attention, or they suggested this, because it ended up being the reason we won the basketball game.
Yeah, absolutely. Having that trust where your players feel like they can say something and you as a coach are actually listening to it and may potentially like implement it. That's huge. And I think that goes a long way in terms of buy-in for your players when they know that it's not just a top-down style of communication, but more of a collaborative effort at times.
Exactly.
Really helps.
And that helps with the attitude problems later when you do have to lay down the law, and you're like, okay, this is what we're doing, and that's just the way it's going to be. Buy in. And then you probably do got the buy-in a little bit more, because they're like, well, he does take our suggestions sometimes, so okay, let's just roll with it. Let's do what we got to do, and let's go. So I mean, it's just a win-win, but by giving the players, that authority every once in a while.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that, for sure. In terms of advice that you would give to coaches who maybe are struggling with communicating with young athletes, or just like teenagers in general, maybe there's just a disconnect that they're having. What advice would you give to coaches who feel like they're struggling in that area?
Yeah, my advice would be to focus on building those bonds and those personal relationships with your kids. Go to team bonding activities like team dinners. Take your team bowling. Get to know your kids. You got time before practice. Get to know them. Ask them how's their parents doing. How's school going. That goes that goes a long way. And then they'll trust you. They'll come up to you. I've had players in the past, ask for relationship advice. Oh, I like this girl. What should I do? Blah, blah. I mean, and, I was struggling with this in school. Just building those relationships. And then the communication will come, because if you just go in and you look at it like it's just, oh, I go into work and I coach this kid and then I go home and I don't worry about that kid beyond that. And it's just, he's helping me win basketball games and that's all you see. I mean, you're really missing the boat as a coach. I mean, you got to see the kid for the kid, as a person. And I think, looking back at my time when I was their age, guys like my assistant coach, Ben Sanesteban, and my head coach, Joe Coleman, and my assistant coach, who's now a head coach, Danny Brown. Those guys really made an effort to, get to know me on a personal level. They made an effort to play one-on-one with me before and after practice. They really made an effort to, build that relationship with me. And I think that's really important. And that's something that I try to do with my kids is building the relationships, and not just with my players, my managers as well.
Mm-hmm.
I talk to those girls all the time in the hallways, and when at practice, like if the kids were shooting free throws, I'd go up to my managers and I'd, talk to them and see how they're doing, see how life's going for them. I mean, I think it's really important. I think you got to focus on just connecting with your program.
Yeah.
Connecting with your program.
And kind of going back to your first point, I feel like there's a real need for anybody who gets into coaching or if anybody listening who knows anybody who's interested in coaching, making sure that they're more interested in working with kids and teenagers more than they are about the sport itself. And I think it's really easy to tell the ones who are in it because they like working with teenagers and they like to also, along with that, be coaching basketball, versus ones who are just like more basketball focused and kind of see their players as just players. I feel like you notice that right away.
Oh, immediately. Immediately. I could be at a coach's clinic and be talking to a coach, and within the first 5 minutes, I know.
Yeah.
I know if he truly cares about the kids and the future husband and father that they're going to be, or even the manager, the future wife and mother they're going to be, or if they just care about, you know, their own ego and winning basketball games, and, you know, what polo they're going to be wearing for the next game, and you know, that kind of stuff, and all they care about is winning state, or if they truly care about, you know, the kid as a person. I mean, you could tell right away.
Yeah, 100%. Let's shift to something that popped into mind about in terms of communication. Obviously, we talked about your ability to communicate with players and some game situations, but is there anything specific that you do or would recommend in terms of communicating with players' families or their parents?
Yeah, so we have an app called GroupMe that my team mom created, and she has a JV GroupMe for the JV team, a varsity GroupMe for the varsity team, and it just makes it a lot easier to communicate with the parents, saying, "Hey, you know, we got this coming up. Uh, this is how we're going to attack it. Do you guys have any suggestions or whatever it might be?" You know, and then we just go from there. As far as, you know, if I have an issue with an individual kid, then obviously, you know, I'm gonna call the parent. I think it's good for them to, you know, hear my voice, or maybe even set up a meeting face to face. And my parents are really good, because there was some times, and even though I think, going back to something I've said before, I think I could have worked on my discipline a lot my first year. But the times I did discipline some kids, the parents were supportive, and they were like, you know what, this he needs to sit today, or he needs to lose the starting spot, or whatever it might be. Coach, I fully support you, and that's rare. You know, I was an assistant for a long time before I got a head job, and there was always flack from the parents. Like, you know, not all the time. Sure, you
Yeah,
got
I know what you
supportive
mean.
parents, but, you know, there was at least one or two parents that just, my baby can't do anything wrong. But that's where, like, I would like to place the parents where I'm at. I mean, they have really supported me when I've needed the discipline, and that just has been such a godsend, you know, to have their support, and it makes it a lot easier, because you know, they can't go cry to, you know, to their parents about me, and you know, they I have their support, so that's that's been great.
Yeah, absolutely. Those conversations for sure can be tough at first, and then I feel like once you've kind of established the tone of everything, and the expectation has kind of been set, then you've kind of pushed past that, and now people kind of know like what's expected of your program, and the way that you're going to be, you know, trying to help out their player as best as possible, and their kid, and it's a little tough at first, but once it gets going, I think the parents realize that you're all about it, and you're there for the right reasons for sure.
Yeah, and you got to put in the work too. I mean, it's not just building relationships with the kids. It's, you know, you got to build, you know, relationships with the parents as well. You know, communicating, asking how things are going at home with them, and with work, and with other things. I mean, it's really important to get out and, you know, get to know your parents. You know, you can't just be like, oh, that's Justin's mom. You know, it's waving at her. You know, you gotta know the ins and outs of that individual, you know, because I think it's only going to benefit you in the long run.
Yeah, 100%. Something I want to get back to, because I made a note of it and I wanted to make sure I kind of addressed it more formally, is the expectation in terms of your players' communication and how you kind of like build that in terms of your players feeling comfortable and knowing that they need to communicate with one another. Feel like that's one of the biggest things that a lot of coaches kind of struggle with, is their team communicating and their players communicating with one another. What kind of steps do you feel kind of led to your team being able to communicate effectively as well as consistently always talking with each other?
I think it's important I stress this. My first year I was an off-campus coach, so it was kind of harder to police. But it's getting a little bit easier this year. Is just making sure that they're communicating with each other on campus. If they see each other in the hall, that they are shaking each other's hands and greeting each other. Maybe they could eat lunch together, and communicate like that. I always make sure that I'm posting stuff on our Google Classroom to where they can communicate with each other. Um, Group texts and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Go a long way, making sure they're communicating with each other. And then when it gets time to communicate on the floor, it just gets a lot easier.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I think that's some really good insight there for sure. Also, communication. We talked about a few different game situations. Is there anything unique or in particular that you do during halftime with communication?
To just making sure like it depends on the game. I mean, there could be some games where we're not executing that well. They might not be, moving well without the basketball within the offense. So I'll draw up the offense again and I'll be like, okay, you pass the ball. What are your options?
Mm-hmm.
And then have them lead it and then have them talk about it. And I think another thing that I do too is I like to just stay outside of the locker room with my coaches for probably the first 2 to 3 minutes a half. And then I walk in slowly into the door.
Mm,
And if they're silent, I think there's an issue.
yeah.
But if I'm walking in and they're talking to each other and they're like, well, we need to box out better, or we need to do this, or we need to do that. Uh, that's a great halftime locker room to walk into, because they're talking to each other and they're leading it. They're engaged with each other and they're talking about the game, and what needs to change or what they're doing well or whatever. Um, so I think that's really important, and having them lead that, and then I could just build off of that, and I could draw up what I see,
Mm.
and then go to my assistant what they see and what and just all collaborating together.
It's really interesting the kind of thought that you have about what the locker room would look like before you get in there, like if it's really quiet versus if there's a lot of communication going on. I guess I never really thought about it that way, but I guess it does tell you a lot about your team and the state of how things are going when you can kind of assess your locker room just
and,
based
and,
on
and it's
that.
the little things that you look at, even bench energy. Like I'm sure you've seen this, where Gino Oriella says the first thing he watches when he watches game film, he's not even looking at the play he's running. He's looking at his bench. And
Mm,
he said one time he benched Brianna Stewart, probably one of the best players in WNBA right now. And he was like, I benched Brianna Stewart because her body language. I went back and I watched film, and her body language was horrible.
yeah.
And I went to her and I said, Stewie, then sit down. You're not. That's it. Like, nah. Like I think if their body language is bad on the bench, their body language is bad in the locker room. I mean, that's a form of communication too. Your body language is screaming. Your
Yeah.
body language is almost more important than your verbal communication.
Yeah.
So I just think And it's like that in the locker room. If your body language is slouched over and you're looking off to the side, you're not paying attention to what your teammate or your coach is trying to say. I think that goes a long way as well.
Yeah, that's something that I've done and still would like to continue to make sure I emphasize is obviously we watch game film for a whole multitude of reasons, but just watching game film and looking at your bench and looking at your body language and nothing else, it's really informative and really interesting because at least I found like my thought about that is if you look at that and you notice that, that's also what like everybody else in the stands notices as well, because they kind of have that same view. They see the way your bench reacts and they see the body language of your team. And so you kind of get an insight as to maybe what somebody on the outside kind of thinks about your program just by looking at the body language.
Yeah, and another piece that you went to go back, circle around to when you were talking about advice. What advice I'd give to a coach, and this would fix the body language problem, is give the bench roles. Like if it's on defense, like the entire bench better be clapping. Like we have like call it D clap, like it's like a rhythm clap. Like they gotta all be doing it. Like everybody on the bench, probably 7-8 guys, and we're on defense. Hey, they're clapping. The bench energy. In a way, almost is like the six man on the floor. It's almost like you get an extra guy on the floor.
Yeah,
I mean, it's so infectious and contagious, and I think advice for coaches would be make sure your bench is engaged in the game. They have to be, and including your assistant coaches. Give all your assistant coaches roles, even if it's just your C team guys doing stats. When I was
keep them invested.
Yeah. Well, when I was a C team coach, I did stats.
Yeah.
I did stats, and you got to be. It forces you to be engaged in the game, and then you could have. So let's say you have a floater that knows he's not going to play in the game. He focuses on the D clap kind of stuff. He also focuses on because when I was an assistant coach and I was in charge of stats, the varsity game went fast, and I might be looking down to stat an offensive board, but I missed 2 tip-in attempts.
Yeah.
I missed the 2 offensive rebounds that followed those tip-in attempts. And have that floater sit next to the C team coach or the JV, however you want to do it. Have that floater sit next to that coach. And if that coach misses anything, that could be like offensive rebound, tip in, he made the 2-point layup. This guy made it. That way he can help you out, because if you look down, you can miss so much.
Yeah.
So just giving everybody roles, and that'll keep everybody engaged, because if you don't give people roles, they're just sitting there. Even the assistant coaches, even the adults. I mean, that's one of the things that I've learned as a head coach is you got to mentor and bring along your assistant coaches too. You got to be worried about that, because if you're not worried about that, they're gonna be disengaged and whatever, and it's gonna, because they're human. We're all human. If I don't have a direct role and I'm not given a specific task, I'm gonna stare off into space, or I'm gonna goof off or whatever.
Sure.
You gotta lay the expectations out for them. So I make sure I do a lot of work with my staff and lay the expectations out for them as well, because in turn, that's ultimately going to help why we're doing it. It's going to help the kids.
Yes, 100% agree. I really like the way that you worded that. Awesome. To wrap up, Coach, there's a couple questions I ask every guest, so I'm going to go ahead and get started here with this first one. Thinking back on your coaching career, what is a coaching moment of yours that you think others listening would be able to learn from?
Oh, man. And this is ultimately the game that kept us out of the state tournament. My first year we were playing Cuba at our place, and we were up 3 with about 5 seconds to go, and my best shooter had a 1-and-1 to seal the game. We're up 3. He misses the front end. I just let the play out. The guy goes down at the volleyball line, shoots off balance shot off the glass, nails it, forces OT. With about 45 seconds to go in regulation, my second best player had fouled out, so we didn't have him for OT, and he was one of my few big men. My other big man was out, so I only had one big man. He fouled out at the end of regulation, so I didn't have him going in OT, and we just got lit up in OT, and we lost the game. And ultimately, they finished a little bit ahead of us in district, which got them the final seed of the state tournament, and we were out, even though we had a much better record than they did. Our association focuses a lot on district finish. That's one of the main criteria to getting the state tournament. So even though we had a better record than they did, they had the tiebreaker for third place over us, and so they finished ahead of us in district because of that game. And we're watching film of that game, and one of my kids goes, "Coach, you probably should have fouled." And the more and more I thought about it, I was like, "Yeah, you're right. I probably should have put him to the line for 2 free throws. We're up 3 at the time." And if I could have done that all over again, I probably would have fouled in that situation. And granted, we probably should have not 9 out of 10 times that guy doesn't even hit that shot to begin with. But at the same time, I mean, shoot, he made the one that counted. I probably should have fouled in that situation, up 3. But I just think late game management is so important, and that's one where I kind of dropped the ball a little bit, and we could talk for hours. Do you foul in that situation or do you not? And there's really no right wrong answer. Maybe I'm saying I probably should have fouled because I got beat because I didn't. But and I'm sure there's other coaches that would preach the exact opposite in that situation because they got beat doing that. So that I think there's really no right or wrong answer. I guess it really just depends. I think it depends on the opponent at that time too. But making sure your late game situations are, in order, maybe chart it out, maybe say, hey, if we're in this situation, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And when you do situations in practice, the kids know. The kids know this is what we're doing in this situation. And I think, and maybe even having a chart, maybe have a spreadsheet of late game situations, of every kind that you can really think of, because that bit me in the butt. Yeah. And it's definitely something to learn from.
All right. Thank you. I know sometimes those are some tough moments to share, but I appreciate you sharing your insight on that one in particular. I feel like we all kind of have those that we think back on. So appreciate you sharing that, Coach. And then to wrap up, I give every guest what I call a 60-second soapbox. You can go longer, though. I'm not timing you. It's your platform to get out kind of your final idea, your final thought, just a closing message to leave the listeners with. So, Coach, I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor, and you can take it away.
I would just want to, that'd sound like a broken record, but but really build the relationship with the kids. Really get to know your kids. Really let them know that you care about them. When I was at Highland, and we got there, me and Coach Woody got there at the same time, and the kids really didn't buy in at first. And we preached family, we preached, together. We preached being one unit, being a family, and the kids really didn't buy in at first. But we didn't get away from that. We stuck with it. We kept preaching it and preaching it and preaching it. And some of our bad attitudes, when they were sophomores, became, the catalyst of the team that lost in the state final. My first year at Laguna Acoma. It was really tough to leave that senior group. They were going in the season as heavy favorites, and they ended up losing in the state final. But those kids just really just bought in finally. Coach Woody did a really good job of not deferring from the culture that he wanted to create, and he just stuck with it. And if you preach it enough times, it's just gonna infest in a positive way with the kids. Just never give up on a kid. You're gonna have a difficult kid, but really work with those kids, the difficult kids in particular, because you don't know what's going on at home. You don't know, what's happening. So, really work with those difficult kids, especially because, they're really diamonds in the rough. and some of those kids now are, I got one of those kids that was at Highland. He's playing in the VBA now, out in Vietnam, and he's doing some good things. So, just because a kid might be rough around the edges at first, those are the kids that really can flourish with, enough love and attention to detail. So, just focus on the kids. We're there for the kids. We love the kids, and that's what it's about. It's not about us. It's about the kids. So just focus on those relationships and building those relationships with the kids. I think that's the most important thing with what we do.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. Very good. Awesome, Coach. Coach Bachicha, I want to thank you for spending some time talking about the way you communicate, talking about your program, talking about ways in games or in practice or even off the court that you communicate with players, building those relationships and all of the great stuff and benefits that leads to. So, Coach, hopefully you have a safe season and you can kind of get back into your normal routine, and best of luck this year, Coach. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. Good luck to you too, Coach. I'm here if you need anything.
Appreciate it. Thank you all for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.